Hello. We are so glad that you joined us today for the 2017 History Film Forum. Do we have any emerging filmmaker lab participants in the audience? Oh, that's wonderful. Special welcome to you. I'm Karen Kenton. I'm a program officer in the Division of Public Programs at the National Endowment for the Humanities. NEH is a federal funding agency that supports humanities teaching, scholarship, preservation, and public programs in communities all across the country. In the Division of Public Programs, we fund a wide variety of work: museum exhibitions, library discussion programs, websites and apps, radio programs, podcasts, and of course, documentary films and public engagement initiatives. The heart of our work is sharing stories of our cultural heritage and helping people understand why history matters. The Loving Story is an excellent example of this. The film received a production grant in 2010. Grants are made through rigorous peer review processes. Panelists recommended this film for funding because Nancy had assembled an outstanding team of academic advisors. And because they also felt the proposed film offered a compelling and sophisticated analysis of the Jim Crow South, the Civil Rights Movement, and anti-miscegenation laws. And while the Supreme Court case may be familiar to historians and lawyers, the groundbreaking legal case was largely unknown to the general public. As you'll see, Nancy's film not only provides a powerful yet intimate portrait of the Lovings' personal journey, but along the way you learn a great deal about constitutional law, the courts, and the larger history of segregation in the United States. I'd like you to know that we included the Loving Story in a special NEH initiative, Created Equal: America's Civil Rights Struggle. This special film set is encouraging communities across the United States to revisit the history of civil rights and reflect on the ideals of freedom and equality at key moments in American history. Created Equal brings together 5 highly successful NEH-funded documentaries: The Abolitionists, Slavery by Another Name, which we screened yesterday, Stanley Nelson's Freedom Riders, and his other film, Freedom Summer, and of course, The Loving Story. Together, these films tell the stories of truly remarkable individuals who challenged the social and legal status quo in their own time, from slavery to segregation. The films also foster a deeper understanding of how civil rights have been fought for and won in this country, and they convey that this is very much an ongoing story. I hope you'll take time to visit the Created Equal website. All 5 films are streaming free of charge and are accompanied by educational resources and discussion guides along with other resources. Nancy, thank you for your vision and for the passionate dedication you bring to all your work at Augusta Films. Thank you especially for bringing Richard and Mildred Loving Story to life through the documentary film and through your work on the recent feature film, Loving. Both films continue to inform and move new audiences, and the documentary will certainly have educational impact for many, many years to come. We are thrilled that you are contributing to so many discussions throughout the forum. Nancy is also participating in the Women in History Filmmaking panel tomorrow at 11 a.m., and I hope we'll see you all there too. So now we'll run the film, and Nancy will join us for a discussion following the screening. Thank you very much.
Is everybody feeling all right? Yeah, you all right? Was that amazing or what, huh? My name is Xavier Carnegie. I'm the host of the Smithsonian Music Web series, My American Roots, and it is my honor and pleasure to be with you all here for the second annual History Film Forum. I think we all enjoyed watching that film so much, and you guys are really going to want to stick around for our discussion with the director. Before we do that, I want to remind you that your pictures and thoughts on social media today, you should make sure to hashtag those History Film Forum, and also you can always hit us up at American History Museum, AM History Museum. There also will be time for a Q&A after our brief discussion here. If you look to your left and right on either side down the aisles, there are microphones, so if you have a question when we open that up, you go ahead and take your place there, and we'll try to get to as many folks as we can. All right, now it is my real pleasure to introduce to you all the director of The Loving Story, Nancy Bursky. Nancy? I would clap too, but I'm using this new technology for my questions here. So I hope you'll forgive me. Thank you so much for sharing your film with us. I gotta tell you, I was really impressed watching it, particularly in light of the film that came out last year, Loving. Now, first of all...
It's on now.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about, I know you worked on that film a little bit as well.
That's right.
So can you talk to us a little bit about that kind of, I guess, comparison and contrast with the documentary as opposed to the more dramatic narrative for you?
Well, maybe I should give you a little history of how they came together and how they developed. And this is unusual because there are not a lot of feature films that have been made from documentaries, although many have tried, a few have succeeded. And I think one of the reasons that this did work was that I was involved in both from the beginning. When I discovered The Loving Story, which was in 2008, having read Mildred Loving's obituary, I was struck immediately with how powerful her story was, their story, and how it could have been equally powerful as a documentary and as a feature film. So I basically put together two treatments. One was for the documentary and one was for the feature, and I kind of had them side by side when I was talking to people. The documentary just got traction first. Documentaries are less expensive to make, and I had discovered this incredible footage that ended up in the film, and it was somehow easier to put all the pieces of the documentary together. But while I was finishing the documentary, I was starting to talk more and more about the feature. I just was convinced that it would make a beautiful narrative film. And I was very lucky to come across, to have met Colin Firth, who was, a fine actor, but also very interested in social policy in the United States. And he wanted to work with me on the feature. Long story short, we formed a company, we hired Jeff Nichols, but that all happened once the documentary came out and people began to realize they saw the story, that the foundation of the story was there. So now to your question, when you make a documentary, your agenda is to tell the truth, to tell as much of the truth as you possibly can. And as Rick Burns said so notably in his address last year, there can be a truth as compared to the truth, but you're still attempting to do that. In a narrative film, you ideally are going to adhere to the truth to the extent that you can, but you can use your imagination more. So there were certain things that we couldn't pretend to know. The Lovings had both passed. The only person within the Loving family that was still alive was Peggy Loving. We talked to people who knew them, but there were still so many unanswered questions about their relationship. And that wasn't something that we could interpolate from the information we had, that we had gathered for the documentary. But Jeff Nichols could imagine what that love was like. And that's what he did in the feature film. And he tried very hard to stay close to the authenticity of the time and the place, but he could let himself go a little bit more with the love that they shared.
Right. All right. And speaking of, you were mentioning the film that you got. That's amazing footage. It's just beautiful and so personal. One thing that struck me about it is, you could have gone the route, a lot of documentaries go where you're talking about something historical, so you fill it with historians who kind of talk about the people and about the events. But much of this was real footage with their real words, or at least words of their friends and family. Was that a conscious decision from the beginning, or did you come to that through the materials and
Well,
research?
once I found that documentary footage, which was shot by a woman named Hope Ryden, who was a cinema verite filmmaker who worked with Robert Drew and Associates. And so she shot that cinema verite. I'm just curious, how many people even know what that is here? Great, I don't have to explain it. So it's basically you're a fly on the wall and you're letting the action unfold while you're shooting. She did veer away from that a little bit by talking to them and interviewing them, but basically her approach visually was like most verite filmmakers, which is just to kind of stand back and let them do their thing. So once we had that, once I had come across that footage, I realized that we had the spine of the film. And it was then going to be, that footage, by the way, was shot over a 3 or 4 day period. We wanted to tell a much longer story. We wanted to
How did you come across that footage?
I did a background interview with the two lawyers, Phil Hirschkopf and Bernie Cohn, and they remembered when she had come to interview them. So that was so many years ago, but they said you should look her up. And I happen to be, one of my mentors is D.A. Pennebaker, who's one of the great cinema verite filmmakers. And I called him because I noticed that her name, she had a credit with one of his films called Crisis. And he said to me, this is kind of a funny story, he said, oh yeah, you know, Hope is around. She lives about 10 blocks away from you in New York. So I thought, all right, well, and he gave me her phone number and I called her and she was kind of in her mid-80s, you know, and I wasn't sure whether she'd be open to chatting with me. And she said, well, you know, yeah, I shot that footage. I was never able to make a documentary, but I'm not really sure what happened to it. So I said, oh, would you mind looking for it, you know? So she said, okay, let's see if I'll look around. She calls me back a half an hour later. She says, I found it, it's a can in the bottom of my closet. So I was so excited, and so we paid to have it transferred. We sent it to DuArt, and we had it transferred. And the miracle was that it was in black and white. Had it been in color, it would have been magenta. In fact, some of the footage of the Supreme Court, which looks a little magenta in there, that's what happens when that footage sits around and it's not preserved. So anyway, I had luminous 16 millimeter black and white footage to work with, and that kind of set the stage for what I would do next. I can't remember your question now. I was so busy answering.
You sort of answered it.
Okay.
So it sort of came out of finding that footage.
That's right.
Which was, I thought, just a very powerful and personal way to tell that story.
Right.
Let's talk about sort of the history for a moment. Because I think for a lot of folks, how many people had heard this story before? Okay, well, actually, let me ask it a different way. How many people had heard this story before they heard about the film that came out last year? All right, so a lot of folks. I think that a lot of folks, and me personally, are very surprised sometimes when they hear the details about miscegenation. Just as an example, doing some work on colonial history, I was very struck by how common these things kind of could be. Can you talk about, in your research, what kind of struck you as you were researching this to tell this story?
You know, when you say common, what's interesting about Mildred and Richard and the place they grew up in is that they grew up together. You find that there are pockets of this country where a lot of these, where you think there's going to be a tremendous amount of prejudice, when in fact it's just the opposite, because people who are poor and are struggling learn to depend on each other, and they don't see color. They just see the fact that we have to harvest our crops, and we have to feed the cows, and we have to do this and do that, because that's the way we're going to survive. So Richard actually worked for, one of his jobs was working for a black man who owned a timber company. And so he was used to hanging out with blacks and Native Americans. That Central Point area had a lot of Native Americans, mostly Rappahannock. And so he went to listen, as Peggy Loving says in the movie, he went to listen to Mildred's brothers playing hillbilly music, and he met Mildred when she was 14 years old. And so that's what I learned, actually, that wasn't so unusual, that there were lots of places in this country where these things just took place naturally. What Mildred and Richard did, which was unusual, is they got married. There were a lot of couples, a lot of interracial couples, and they had children. And that's why there were so many very, almost white-looking African Americans living in those sections where, they pass. Matter of fact, there's a road in Central Point called Passing Road, honestly. And so that was the norm. What wasn't normal was to go and get married in D.C. and then come back. They broke two laws, basically. The fact that they married and then the fact that they left Virginia to evade the law, and then they came back and lived in Virginia.
Another interesting thing that I think is really unique about this film is that you really show the role of process. As part of the story, there was a lot made about the two lawyers and the ACLU and kind of a lot of footage, amazing footage of them just kind of arguing among themselves the case.
Isn't that fascinating?
Absolutely fascinating. And I was wondering why it was so important to you to include so much of that.
Oh, once I had it, there was no way I wasn't going to do it. I think the idea of watching lawyers debate and even get into a little bit of an argument with each other, and that was, frankly, that was due to Hope Ryden, who was such a good cinema verite filmmaker, and she obviously disappeared into the wall. So that at the point when Phil Hirschkopf kind of reprimands Bernie, because Bernie's kind of lecturing him about how he has to study these cases again and again. And Phil Hirschkopf says, "I've read it over and over again, Bernie," and he gets up and walks out. Believe me, if they had remembered that this filmmaker was in the room, I don't think that would have happened. So I was blessed to have it,
Absolutely, absolutely. Another question kind of along the same lines. Whenever I think about this case, my mind immediately jumps back to the Perez v. Sharp case, which happened a bit before, which was very similar. And I believe they cited that case as well. There are so many of these cases, not just with miscegenation, but with segregation and civil rights, that sort of show how ridiculous this whole thing was. Was there any time in this process where you were just kind of floored by how crazy this system could be?
When you come across that Ku Klux Klan footage, and what you saw in this movie was, an iota of what's available. The Klan they weren't embarrassed about being shot. There were plenty of filmmakers that shot tons of footage of them. And these men giving these speeches about, the mongrelization of the races and all of that. I mean, I thought I knew it. I'd studied history, but when you see the footage of it, it just blows your mind. It's astounding.
Now, there's a lot, and by the way, this year will mark the 50th anniversary of this case. I think they deserve a hand for that, the Lovings. Yes, absolutely, and the team that worked on that. So there's been a lot made of this case in recent years. Can you talk about, as you were working on this film and as you've been showing it, and then the new film last year, can you kind of talk about the relevance? Why is it important for us to know this story?
One of the decisions that you make when you choose a subject is whether or not it's going to resonate and whether or not it's going to feel timely. And when I came across this obituary, I thought to myself, they are, at this very moment, they're debating Proposition 8 in California. And I thought, how can this not be relevant? Also, Obama was beginning to run for the White House. Right. And he's not just an African-American president, he's a mixed-race president. So, the question was, how do we make that connection in this movie? How do we let people know that we know this? And we decided not to. We decided that our audiences are intuitive enough and smart enough to be able to make that connection. And I think that's one of the things that people enjoy about when they're watching a movie, to make that themselves. They don't need to be told all the time. So I hope people agree, but we were very conscious of those connections.
Sure. We're going to open it up for Q&A. If anyone has a question and wants to head towards the mics now, I encourage you to do that. But before we do open it up to these folks, I have one more question for you, and it's a little bit different. Are you working on anything new?
Well, we actually showed thank you for asking. We showed a clip in the previous panel on a film called The Rape of Recy Taylor. And this is a story also, I'm amazed at how many of you knew Loving v. Virginia, but you're historians, I guess, and you should know it.
They're in the right place for it, yeah.
But that's right. But most of the time when I showed this film, most people hadn't heard of it unless they'd gone to law school. This next film is even more hidden. It's about the ubiquitous and chronic physical assaults against black women by white men in the Deep South. And there's a woman named Recy Taylor who was gang raped in 1944 in Abbeville, Alabama. And what is incredible about her, there were many women that this happened to, but she speaks up. And she's obviously putting her life in jeopardy and her family's life in jeopardy, but she knew she didn't deserve it, and she knew that there was a legacy that goes back to slavery, and that enough was enough. And so she spoke up, and she alerts the NAACP in Montgomery about what happened. I mean, she's battered and bruised and almost dies because it's a 5-hour gang rape in the woods of Abbeville. And they send down their chief rape investigator, who happens to be Rosa Parks. This is in 1944. So this is 11 years before the bus boycott. So stick with me. We're starting a Facebook page very soon. I hope you'll follow the developments of The Rape of Recy Taylor. We're getting close to finishing the film. We're not finished yet, but it's a very powerful story, also hidden in plain sight.
Isn't it amazing how this film sort of highlights the great lengths that people will go to separate us, but isn't it amazing how connected we all are? I mean, no one would have known that. A lot of people here probably would never have known that if you hadn't said it.
What? About Recy Taylor?
That connection, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rosa Parks, there's a whole mythology around Rosa Parks. And most people think she was just a tired seamstress that didn't want to change her seat on the bus. But those of you, you're historians, you probably know better, that she was an activist for many, many years. I mean, as a teenager. She was a seamstress. She always worked for white people sewing clothes. As a matter of fact, you can see one of the dresses in the History Museum that she made. But she was a secretary at the NAACP. And she was very interested in the issue of bodily abuse and bodily integrity. And we go into some explanation about that in this film. And that, by the way, that effort that many black women were making to restore bodily integrity and bodily dignity is one of the things that propels the Montgomery bus boycott, which, by the way, was not just a boycott in principle. It wasn't just because we deserved to sit in these seats, but these women were being manhandled on buses. And so there's a interesting connection between Recy Taylor and her desire to restore her own bodily integrity and what happens in Montgomery and what propelled the march just a few months ago, after women were indignant about the way Trump talked about groping women. So, I mean, there's a direct link to all of this. And just like the Loving story is relevant, I do think The Rape of Recy Taylor will find is just as relevant. I'm off my soapbox.
No, I think we're really going to be looking forward to it. Is there a question over here? Go ahead.
So you said you were inspired after you read the obituary. And I was wondering, how often do you come across things or read things or see things where you think, that would be a great story to tell, I want to make a documentary? How common is that?
It happens a lot.
It happens a lot. And what's the process then? So do you kind of write it down and then come back to it? Like, how often do you have to think that you want to make a documentary for you to actually then say, okay, no, I'm going to do this? I was wondering.
The first two films I made, I was struck by the minute I learned about the story. I said, I have to do this. This was The Loving story. And then the next film I made was called Afternoon of a Faun, about Tanaquil Leclerc, which is a beautiful ballet dancer who'd been married to George Balanchine. At the height of her career in the 50s, she's stricken by polio, paralyzed and never walks again. And I saw a little bit, 3 minutes about her in a documentary on Jerome Robbins, and watching her dance and falling in love with her as a dancer, and then discovering what happened to her, and seeing that within that 3 minutes in that film, I was totally smitten. I mean, passionately dedicated to making the film. But again, all of those things, I always think to myself while I'm watching it and falling in love in a way, these people become your muse. Will other people relate to it? Will it have some resonance? And so I'm not 100% committed to making the film unless I'm convinced that will happen.
Let's go over to the right.
One of the credits in this movie, I think, was Martin Scorsese was listed. Is that accurate? How do people like this get attracted to your project? Do you seek them out, or is it just kind of there's a whisper and it starts to accumulate people?
You know, the industry is not as big as people think it is, and I work in New York, and I work with people who know him, and you know, I can't remember exactly how it happened, but there was, you know, I must have told him about it at some point. I met him and told him, and he agreed to advise me on it, and he's been an advisor.
We have one more over here to the right. Go ahead.
Hi. First of all, there's just so much to commend you for in this film. I have to just start by saying that there really, really is.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so my question, I'm going to try to keep it like as a fellow filmmaker, but also, of course, we're human beings, you know, bringing out history and all of that. So one of the things for me as a African-American woman, the kind of immediate elephant in the room, it's so interesting you brought up the bodily integrity issue, is that the context for all of these, you know, anti-marriage laws, what have you, is that it's like the actual sexual relationships between different races was going on all over the place. It was a matter of who gets to decide when it happens and at whose benefit, or if you can even use that term, it happened. So the beyond, I don't even know the right word, irony is too light of a word. You know, all of that. So I'm bringing it up, you know, because that's the immediate thing that I think lots and lots and lots of people, from my experience, are going to immediately have as context as they're watching this. And as a filmmaker, I'm looking at the places where you chose to not necessarily break from the form, but to sort of say, here's the voice of the film in a way, where you have, I think it's Mr. Pratt, make the statement about segregation has always been about preventing sexual...
It's actually Ed Ayers, who was on our panel earlier. Yeah.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember
no,
names.
that's all right.
But then also, I think that there's a moment on... But there's some moments where you clearly, and I think validly so, insert a place of like sort of, here's a little bit of a analysis. We're not overdoing but a little bit of analysis and some context and point of view. And so it was curious to me, all that mixing together, that you definitely have all kinds of ways you poke holes at the simple narrative of what segregation was about or how people really felt about...
I'm sorry, could you go back and repeat that? I got...
Oh, sure,
sorry.
no problem. The choice as a filmmaker as to what was going to be the narrative, if you will, or the analysis that you wanted people to maybe walk away from or look at this through. I was curious that even though it's clear you're complicating things all over the place, the direct voice that says, this is what this was really about, kind of still stuck with a pretty simple liberal, oh, they were trying to keep people from having sex, which flies in the face of the very evidence the film is giving, right? You know, because it's more than just poor whites and blacks getting together. There are light-skinned blacks and people who were had complicated histories with their racial identities because of the forced miscegenation that happened. So I was just interested, I know that that's not going to be the full subject, but it's such a big context for why this was so ironic and crazy and just such a, like, you know, a hard thing for people to grapple with because it was all around and it flew in the face of what the official record said. I was just really curious how you grappled with what your analysis was going to be, where you were going to insert and how much of that you were going to put in. Like, it's just such a complex issue. I was just wondering how you decided as someone presenting history to figure out what you were going to say about the issue.
It's a good question.
You know, one of the things you have to decide when you're making films, and we got into this conversation earlier today, is what's the essence of your story? You know, there's a lot in this. There's a lot of story here, and it gets very complex, and there are a lot of layers. But what's the essence? What's the thing that you want to say in one word that you want people to take away from it? And that's not always easy to get. The more research you do, the more scholarly research you do, and the more, you know, personal research you do, you come to it. And different filmmakers are going to come to different essences. But one of the things that did strike me was something that Ed Ayers said in the film, and we talked about it at more length when we did the interview with him, which was, you know, the reason that segregation existed was because if you got into a space with a person, the other, whatever that other is, whether it's a Jew or it's a black or it's a Native American, but if you've had a prejudice, if you've had a bias against that other, and you get into a room and you get to know that other, then you get to like that other, and then maybe you even begin to love that other. And before you know it, you may even have sex with that other. And that's when the blood starts to get diluted, and maybe these concepts of white and black become less important because we're now living in a blended society, right? So maybe this concept of the other becomes less and less vital. For me, I wanted to put that idea on screen. I wanted us to get close to the Lovings. I wanted people to see that Richard and Mildred were close. That it's about empathy. It's about getting to know the other, getting to know this mixed race couple. I mean, I was hoping there would be people that would be in our audience that were against interracial marriage and that would see this film and get to know Mildred and Richard in the confines of, you know, a theater and come to like them. Just like we want people to like the other and maybe love the other. And these barriers start going away. So did I have an agenda? Yeah, I guess I did. I'm a liberal and I care about these things. That's why I make movies. But, you know, I don't want to preach to people. I don't ever want to do what I'm doing right now, which is explain it. But, you know, I'm hoping my film will make you feel closer to this couple that you may not understand. Just like I'm hoping that, you know, a white supremacist will suddenly feel closer to a black person because they're in the same room and they start to talk and they start to like each other.
Let's go over here to the right.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your work. I've enjoyed both the Loving and as well as the Loving story. I wanted to ask you as a historian and as a filmmaker about source material. And whether or not, as a filmmaker, you prioritize visual sources, or whether or not there are elements when sources are conflicting with each other. You know, you used oral history and interviews so nicely in this film, and did they conflict with historic documentation, or, you know, how do you make those decisions as a historian and filmmaker?
That's a good question. I think I may be lucky, but I haven't found that conflict too often. I feel like most of the visual materials I find seem to complement the oral history and the interviews, and if they do conflict, I feel like I've got to resolve that before I put it in the film. You know, on the other hand, if they're conflicting because people have different opinions, then maybe they both have to go in, because that's where the truth is too. That if there's some tension around the story, if it hasn't been resolved, for instance, in the Recy Taylor film, there's still some tension in Abbeville, Alabama, about, you know, Recy's story. So it's all going to be in there, so you can feel it.
Let's go over here to the right.
Just a couple days ago, I got to see at the Angelica Theater is a United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, okay, so the question is, in a way, there's a similar story there, where in this case, it's a black husband, white wife, and the husband he's the opposite of your Richard. Man, that can, you know, he can speak. I mean, he is everything that everyone would like to be if you think you'd like to be able to speak. So the question is not really comparing the stories. My question is, you were talking about the cinema area, the
Cinema Verite?
No, the number of people doing the films is actually small. Is there any chance that you were aware of that film in process, or the other way around? Do you think there was any connection, or is it just chance that?
I think there are a lot of these stories out there, and they're good stories. So I'm not surprised that film was made. I haven't seen it yet, but I understand it's very good. I know that when we were working on Loving, we were aware that film was being made. but it doesn't affect the way you make the movie. You know, there's so many good stories about, and they should be made, as many of them as possible.
We have time for 2 more. We'll start over here to the left.
Hi, thank you so much for making the movie and coming to talk about it.
You're welcome.
It was a
Thank you.
really wonderful experience. Can you talk just a little bit about making a documentary and then making a feature film? And were the issues different? Was there any conflict that arose between the two processes?
Really not. I mean, it was almost seamless, I have to say. I was interviewed by a reporter at one point, and he wanted to know what he was looking for something kind of sexy, you know, what happened, where were the fights? I said there were none, you know. I mean, we believed, once we chose a director, we believe, and I hope people will feel that way about me someday, that director has the right to implement his vision, his or her vision. And in the case of Jeff Nichols, we had tremendous trust in him. We thought he was a very fine filmmaker. He's a Southerner. We just felt like he would tell it right. We did talk with him about his vision and his story ideas, and we read his script. But, you know, we really wanted to put our faith in him. So, and I think he felt that. He felt our support.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Last one, right over here to the right.
Yes, thank you for your movie. It is, in a way, a very weird story, but there is a very nice or refreshing aspect that the Supreme Court was anonymous. All the Supreme Court members voted. My question is whether there are many cases like this on the Supreme Court where they are not divided, particularly with respect to civil rights. Do you know, maybe this is outside what you study, but I'm just curious whether this is a unique case of all Supreme Court voted for the same case.
Yeah, I hate to, I think this is going to disappoint you a little bit, but it wasn't originally unanimous. Earl Warren refused to let this case come down until it was unanimous. So he kept the arguments going. I mean, I don't know how many days were involved, and I don't know how much arm twisting there was, but this is one case where he didn't feel, it wasn't going to send the right message if there was a divided court. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but someone told me just last night that the same thing happened with Board v. Brown. Board, yeah. So he did this, I mean, apparently did the same thing. Is the hallmark of the Warren Court? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. It's great doing these Q&As. You learn a lot.
You do really good. Nancy Bursky, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Everyone, let's give the filmmaker another hand, please. I really, again, want to thank all of you for joining us for our History Film Forum. Now, coming up, we have a little bit of a break, I believe, and then we are going to ask everyone to exit the theater, but coming up is a presentation on a new series, which is The Great War. There's a lot been made about World War I. Everybody's heard about World War II, but World War I history, where does that fit in? So this new series, it kind of shows that, and we're hoping that you guys will come back, enjoy that with us. Again, thank you so much for participating in the second annual History Film Forum. We'll see you guys in a couple of minutes.